And on that question, the division has been challenged. Tellers Taw, Senator Diarmaid Wilson and Senator Paul Daly. Tellers Neil, Senator Paddy Burke, Senator Michelle Mulhern. Time allocated for vote. He's 1 minute starting now. Allocated for voting. Result of the vote is Taw 15, Neil 13. The amendment is carried.
Section 9 is amended.
That's Section 9 of the amendments and part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Section 10. That's Section 10 is that part of the bill. Is that agreed? Section 11 is government amendment. I move.
Should we wait for the Minister?
Oh, we better wait for the Minister, yeah.
Five is a government amendment, and I move. Minister. Amendment number 5. Minister.
Number 5 is this amendment is of a typographical nature. In page 14, line 15, to delete board a committee and substitute board or a committee. We're adding the word or.
Senator Norris.
This is grammatically completely unnecessary. It means exactly the same thing. Board with a comma or a committee. A committee means board or a committee. So it's unnecessary. That's the one point. But if the Minister wants to make it, fine by me. But however, on the whole amendment, or on the whole section...
section in a minute.
OK, well, then I'll reserve my...
So, on the amendment, is the amendment agreed? Agreed. Section 11. Now, Senator Norris, on section 11.
I have to say, I'd like to ask the Minister, I know these things are kind of put in as a matter of course, excluding members of the Senate and members of the Dáil and members of the European Parliament. I mean, why? I'd like the Minister to give me a rationale for that. What exactly is so poisonous about being a member of the Oireachtas? Why should somebody who is one day sufficiently qualified to be a member of the board of Bord na Gán or wherever it is, why should they be ruled out? I don't see the need for this, and I've opposed these amendments on these sections on many occasions. I mean, it seems daft to me to exclude, unless, of course, it is because one assumes that members of Parliament are fully occupied by being members of Parliament. But I wouldn't think that being members of the board of Bord na Gán or wherever it is, that would be a very onerous duty. And I would think that most of the people involved would be full-time professional people of one kind or another anyway. So I don't see the time constraints or anything. And, I mean, if we trust people to legislate, what in the name of God is to prevent them being on the board of the greyhound industry? I don't see any reason for it at all. It's more this kind of self-flagellation by politicians, you know, to show that we're incorruptible. The public doesn't believe it anyway. They think we're all corrupt. And if you took off all your clothes, gave all your money to Vincent Ball and danced naked along the roof of Leinster House, people would still say, there you are, see, so what? You know, they're not impressed. The public isn't impressed. So I would say, I'm just questioning why members of the Oireachtas should be excluded from membership of the board. Yeah? And it even goes down to a director of the subsidiary. You can't even be director of the subsidiary if you're a member of the Oireachtas. It's complete and utter nonsense. And I'm opposing it. I'm opposing this section.
Thank you. Just following on from Senator Norris's point, and it doesn't just relate to this particular board, it relates to all state boards. And there is a wider point, I think, that I would agree with, and that has been raised by Senator Norris, that I'd be very interested to hear the response from the Minister on it. In relation to the board generally on the section, and which was referred to as well in section 9, the issue of a board member where their term expires, but until such time as a vacancy arises, they're not replaced. I think that's wrong. And if we're trying to bring in a time frame in this particular legislation to have board members serve a term no more than 2 consecutive terms, then once the second term is up, they should be gone, and the vacancy should be filled immediately. And I'm not sure why that is not the case. Now, I know it's mentioned more in section 8, subsection 10. But it's something that I can maybe deal with at report stage, but it is an issue nonetheless. And just a general point in relation to an organisation which was kind of castigated earlier by a member, and while I appreciate everyone has the right to exercise their opinion, I want to categorically state on the record that the only body, the Irish Greyhound Owners and Breeders Federation, is the only legitimate body with a democratic mandate representing the owners and the breeders. And they have an opportunity to nominate, not elect, to nominate 2 people to contest Senate, the Seanad elections. And on every occasion they have done so to the best of their ability in nominating people who have supported, helped, or have a connection with the greyhound industry. And I am honoured to be one of the representatives for the Irish Greyhound Owners and Breeders Federation, a federation who have unearthed a lot of dirty laundry about this industry, and only for the work of that federation, this bill may not be on the floor of this House this evening. And I want to acknowledge their contribution and their work, because they were steadfast in their contributions in bringing to the attention of the Agriculture Committee back in 2015, when, under the stewardship of the now Minister of State, who made an excellent job at the time as chairperson of that committee, in hearing all of the views from the stakeholders, including the Federation. So it should not, their contribution should not be undermined or understated, and that's all I want to say on that particular topic. The membership issue, I would agree with Senator Norris. It's an interesting point, and I'm not sure why members of the Oireachtas or the European Parliament are excluded. It's not necessarily a case that they should be the first persons appointed to any board, but they certainly shouldn't be excluded from becoming members of the board, because you see a lot of former ministers in particular and members of the Houses on various boards, but perhaps current members could contribute equally as well as former members to any boards.
If this is something copied from the British jurisdiction.
Sorry, could Minister, do you wish to comment further on that?
I think it's a standing position that members of the Oireachtas and the European Parliament just remember that members of state boards have a fiduciary function to represent and duty to that board that they are appointed to, and there is always the risk of a conflict of interest as opposed to time or duty with somebody who is actually a legislator and a policy maker and somebody who implements that policy. So I think that's the rationale. But again, it's something that I wouldn't seek that if it is to be changed at anybody, that it's a wider debate, and a vote of monies to state boards by elected members would seem inappropriate too, and to be a conflict of interest. I mean, I don't really wish to comment on some of the other observations that are made or contributions that have been made at this stage. There's technical issue with regard to the subsection 10 of section 8, which members of the board, which I think is just for technical clarity, but we can get clarification for the Deputy Senator if he wishes further.
Whether or not we're following the British jurisdiction in this. You don't? No. Right. Okay.
Okay, so section 11, section 11 as amended stand part of the bill. Is that agreed?
No.
Okay, the question is that section 11 as amended stand part of the bill. Those in favour say "ta." Those against say "nil." I think the question is carried. Section 12. Section 12 stand part of the bill. Agreed. Section 13. The section 13 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Section 14. The section 14 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Section 15. Amendment number 6 is a government amendment, and I move, Minister. Amendment number 6.
Amendment number 6. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Just very quickly, I've taken on board the comments of Senator Lawler made during the second stage that this provision was unwieldy, and requested parliamentary draftsmen to examine it. So I believe this new wording addresses the issues and this makes this section easier to read. That's all.
Agreed. Section 15 is amended stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Section 16. The section 16 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Section 17. The section 17 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Section 18. The section 18 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Sorry.
Can I talk to the amendment 17 and 18?
Yeah, well, we're just on the section. We're just on section. We didn't come to them yet. So section 18. So section 18 agreed? Agreed. Section 19. The section 19 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Section 20. The section 20 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Section 21. Section 21 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Section 21.
Section 21. Yes. Thank you. Section 21 on page 21. Yeah, just there's a section 21. I think it's N. 1N, where it reads prohibiting the entry to a greyhound. This is to do with greyhounds that were maybe banned in another jurisdiction. That it would follow through. So the section is that the board may, after consultation with the Minister, make regulations for the use, management and control of greyhound racetracks in relation to the following. And it goes on to say, under N, prohibiting the entry to a greyhound race in the state of a greyhound the subject of a sanction of a foreign greyhound racing jurisdiction. That's absolutely fine, and that is correct. But that's where the full stop should be placed, in my view, or where agreement has been reached with the other greyhound racing jurisdiction. So let's take, for instance, a greyhound that was found to be racing across the water in England and was banned due to the fact that it had taken illegal substances. So it was banned in England, but the board have the discretion to allow that dog to race here in Ireland. I think that is wrong, and I would ask the Minister to reflect on that under point N, and to put a full stop after racing jurisdiction, because any dog banned for the illegal substance abuse in another jurisdiction should also be banned here, obviously until such time as the process has concluded. So, because there should be no grey areas around the use of drugs, particularly Class A drugs, in this sector. And it is one of the recurring themes and issues which is emerging from greyhound owners and breeders. The ordinary people in the industry, not the people that sit on the board or benefit from the financial rewards through the Greyhound Fund. These are the ordinary punters up and down the street, and they have huge concerns about this particular issue. And I think that there should be no misconception, no grey area. It should be black and white. And if it is to be black and white, then we should be abiding by the outcome of any drug testing in another jurisdiction until such time as the process has concluded, and there should be no allowable situation where a dog, for example, last Saturday night raced in Manchester and he's allowed to race in Clonmel the following Tuesday, even though he had drugs in the system, cocaine or a Class A drug. It's very, very wrong. There should be no grey area around that.
Senator O'Donnell, it seems to me to be perfectly obvious that if a dog has been subjected to a doping test and the owner has been convicted of doping the dog, it seems extraordinary that if this happens in England, then that the dog wouldn't be banned from an Irish racecourse. I would think it would be absolutely obvious. So I completely agree with Senator O'Donnell, and I hope the Minister will take this on board, and if not, I hope Senator O'Donnell will put down an amendment which I will strongly support at report stage.
Senator Raymond Butler.
Jurisdictions being banned if found drugs in their system. But that wouldn't happen, basically, where a dog could run in Manchester 1 week and then come back over to Ireland and run another week, because they would have to do a clearance trial and trial in. And the Sparrow was an open class dog, but they'd be banned automatically. There is other reasons why dogs are banned as well too, like some dogs don't chase the hare over in England, or don't chase certain hares, and they are banned. So we to bring them in the jurisdiction as well too, banning them as well. You know, so there is other rules and regulations why dogs are banned from racing. But to go back to the Senator's comments about various organisations ruling the roost when it comes to greyhound owners and trainers, we all know, and I'll stand on the record here and I'll prove it, that basically shenanigans went on with a lot of greyhound owners and breeders organisations when it came to picking people to run for this jurisdiction here in this body, in this House, because I know what went on because I was involved down through the years. So to say that there was, it was a clean process was far from clean, I can tell you, and I'll stand by my words.
Thank you. Minister, do you wish to?
Very quickly, look, I take on board the Senator's comments. I think perhaps there's clarification needed about where agreement is reached. It could be for a number of reasons. It could be that it hasn't been established verbatim that the dog has either been subject to a ban or has been seen to be for some other reasons, as the example given by Senator Butler. But where the dog may be the subject of a sanction we can actually clarify, I think, what that entails, and perhaps clarify it through a report stage amendment. Okay.
To Section 1, Section 21 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Section 22 to Section 22 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Section 23 to Section 23 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Section 24 to Section 24 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Section 25 to Section 25 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Section 26, Amendment number 7, in the names of Senators Ruan, Black, Sullivan and Higgins. Amendments 7 to 16 inclusive are related and may be discussed together by agreement. Is that agreed? Agreed. Senator Ruan. To move.
So the contribution I prepared on this deals with all of them at the one time, so you might bear with me for a few minutes. What time are we?
Well, we're due to adjourn at in 4 minutes.
4 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Have you got 4 minutes to go?
More than 4.
Oh, then that's great. Goodbye.
Senator Ruan without interruption.
So amendments 7 to 13 are to sections 26, 28 and 29 of the bill and are all essentially identical amendments tabled to the sections of the bill relating to the artificial insemination of greyhounds, the traceability of greyhounds and the welfare of racing greyhounds. Their overall effect would be to increase and clarify the regulatory responsibilities of the Greyhound Board in respect of these 3 areas. By replacing the words may with shall and inserting each of before following, the amendments taken together would firstly mean that the Board's regulatory powers would turn from statutory capabilities to statutory responsibilities, and that every subsection in which the Board is currently able to regulate would no longer be optional and at the discretion of the Board, but statutory requirements set out in law. In Section 26, for example, which relates to the artificial insemination of greyhounds, the bill as currently drafted would allow for the Board to skip subsection N as it issues its regulations in this area, which reads, measures relating to the health and welfare of such centres. We don't want the health and safety requirements within this bill to simply be optional. We want them as strong as possible to safeguard the welfare of the animals. With this amendment to Section 26, we would simply strengthen and clarify the regulatory responsibilities of the Board. Another example is in Section 28, which refers to the traceability of greyhounds, which is obviously a hugely important issue for maintaining of oversight of the welfare of animals and general accountability of the industry. Subsections A to H set out strong and comprehensive provisions for the practicalities of how a traceability database will work. What we are therefore trying to achieve with Amendments 9 and 10 is to ensure that the Board firstly has a statutory responsibility to issue regulations in this area, and also that every area outlined in subsection 1 must be regulated for with no exceptions. It would actually just increase the effectiveness of the overall intention of Section 28 and strengthen the tracing framework, and would be a worthy addition to the bill. The last amendment is to Section 29, which is obviously a significant section, as it is the main one referring to the health and welfare of racing greyhounds. We want this section to be as strong as possible, so that the addition of shall and each of would increase the effectiveness of the following provisions and actually raising welfare standards in the industry. We want all parts of this section to be compulsory in terms of the Board's regulation of this area, so that's what we're going to do with Amendments 11, 12 and 13. Amendment 14 is tabled in a similar vein to fix what would appear to be a grammatical error in subsection 1 of Section 29, where from my reading it would appear to make regulations that required persons involved in greyhound racing to protect the health and welfare of a racing greyhound optional. If those same persons simply provided information for the purposes of the proper administration of the industry, this would appear to be a drafting error, as it would make the statutory responsibility to protect the welfare of greyhounds only optional. So we are seeking to replace or with and to make both those subsections compulsory. Amendment 15 would make an additional provision in the regulatory powers of the Board and would allow for the Board to make regulations on provisions for the health and welfare of a racing greyhound that has been retired by its owners. In other words, retirement plans for the racing dogs While I recognise that much progress has been made in recent years in terms of conditions for dogs following retirement, with notable decreases in 2014 and 2015 in dog pound figures of greyhounds being put to sleep and a notable rise in greyhounds being transferred to welfare groups, there are still no industry-wide standards and regulations on the best way for a dog's welfare and health to be managed in its retirement. We are therefore seeking to place responsibility on the board to take on and this task and issue those guidelines for how these dogs should be treated, and this amendment is supported by Dogs Trust.
Rowan, could I ask you to report progress, please?
Report progress.
Yeah, thank you. So the debate is now adjourned, and we move on to item number 3. Thank you, Senators. Thank you, colleagues. On the Disclosures Tribunal report, welcome Minister Flanagan to the House and ask him to make his contribution. Minister Flanagan. In your own time, there's no panic.
Not my place to comment, Cathaoirleach, but I do remark the absence of senators for what I would have thought was a very important debate.
Absolutely, well said.
Certainly in stark contrast to this time last year, when the rafters of the place were lifted with frenzied indignation on the part of many people in the House who are not here as yet in order to discuss the third interim report of the Disclosures Tribunal, but I expect to be attending later on. Any reading of the report leaves us in no doubt that a good member of An Garda Síochána was badly treated by those whose job it was to serve the people of this country and not serve themselves. The principal finding relates to the treatment of Sergeant Maurice McCabe. The Tribunal has set out in a clear and stark way the ordeal which Sergeant McCabe endured. Many aspects of the report before us this evening make for very disturbing reading. What shines through at all times in this report is the courage and the incredible level of resilience of Maurice McCabe and his loving family. Since the report was published, I have spoken with Sergeant McCabe on the phone. On behalf of the State, I apologise to him and his family for the manner in which he was treated over a prolonged period of time. I have to say, Cathaoirleach, he was extremely gracious, accepted that apology in the spirit in which it was offered to him. I intend to meet Sergeant Maurice McCabe in person over the coming weeks. I look forward to those discussions. I know that the entire House joins with me in wishing himself and his family well. My sincere hope is that Maurice McCabe, his wife Lorraine and their family can now put this horrendous and prolonged ordeal firmly behind them and get on with their lives. I have no doubt in my mind that Sergeant Maurice McCabe has done the State some service. He deserves our sincere thanks for that. And while this module of the Tribunal addressed Sergeant McCabe's situation, the report shines a light on many issues and events contains many important lessons for us all. Cathaoirleach, I propose to look at the report's main findings and outline the way forward as I see it. I want to thank Mr Justice Peter Charlton for the efficient and effective manner in which he conducted this module of the Tribunal's business, and for the clarity of his report and for its conclusions. I want also to thank Mr Justice Sean Ryan, the former President of the Court of Appeal, who will take over the work of the Tribunal for Module 2 in relation to the matters covered by paragraph P of its terms of reference. That paragraph covers any Garda who made protected disclosures and who alleged that they were subsequently targeted or discredited as a result. To put the matter in context, I will outline briefly the background to the Tribunal. The Tribunal arose essentially out of two protected disclosures made by Superintendent David Taylor and Sergeant Maurice McCabe to my predecessor as Minister for Justice and Equality, Francis Fitzgerald, in the autumn of 2016. Those protected disclosures alleged that a campaign was being run by senior Gardaí to discredit Sergeant Maurice McCabe. In general terms, the primary allegations which gave rise to this tribunal related to A, the alleged use of entirely false allegation of serious criminal misconduct by Sergeant McCabe and the involvement of Tusley in this regard. B, allegations that the then Garda Commissioner Noreen O'Sullivan sought to use these allegations to discredit Sergeant McCabe at the O'Higgins Commission of Investigation. And C, that senior members of the service acted in a manner intended to discredit or traduce Sergeant Maurice McCabe. In relation to these matters, his primary conclusions are clear. The report is emphatic in its vindication of Sergeant Maurice McCabe. While that vindication may well have been a long time coming, it was unequivocal. It states that he is a genuine person who is concerned to maintain standards and that he has done the state considerable service by bringing failures within An Garda Síochána to the attention of the wider public. Sergeant Maurice McCabe deserves the gratitude of all of us for bringing these serious shortcomings to the public attention. The report finds that an error made in preparing a report on allegations against Sergeant Maurice McCabe was allowed to remain uncorrected. This was a Tusley issue, will be addressed in due course by my colleague Minister Zappone. No one before the O'Higgins Commission of Investigation ever accused Sergeant Maurice McCabe of any crime, hinted at it, or engaged in any innuendo about it. This is an important finding for the reputation of the former Garda Commissioner Noreen O'Sullivan. I'll return to this point momentarily. The Tribunal found that both former Commissioner Martin Callanan and Superintendent David Taylor had not been truthful in their evidence. The Tribunal accepts the evidence of my predecessor Francis Fitzgerald that she decided not to interfere following an email of the 15th of May 2015 informing her that an issue had arisen at the Commission of Investigation. The report emphasises that her response was a considered response. On a personal basis, I want to say that Francis Fitzgerald is a loss to the Cabinet. She's a loss to the Government, a loss to public service at that level. I don't believe that her resignation served any public interest, though it may have served the political interests of some parties. I hope there will be an opportunity for former Minister Francis Fitzgerald to be returned to high office in the near future. I hope that senators will reflect on their own contribution to debates both within this House and outside it last November. The frenzied rush on the part of many to judgment brought down a good and decent woman. Returning to the Tribunal's central findings, Cathaoirleach, it's also accepted that former Minister Fitzgerald did not speak with Commissioner O'Sullivan, and the Tribunal finds that, in fact, no situation requiring intervention by the Minister occurred before the O'Higgins Commission. A particular allegation was made about my department's involvement with those transcripts, but the report states clearly that the transcripts provided to the Tribunal from the O'Higgins Commission of Investigation are, and always were, complete, despite unfounded media speculation to the contrary. I'd like specifically to mention former Commissioner Noreen O'Sullivan. Garda Commissioner Noreen O'Sullivan was the subject of a concerted campaign to undermine her position over a period of time. From the leaking of partial and misleading transcripts from the O'Higgins Commission right up to the making of the 2 protected disclosures, and even following the establishment of the tribunal itself. While I accept that the Oireachtas has a vital role to play in ensuring accountability, it's incumbent upon all of us as elected representatives not to abuse the responsible positions that we hold. What we expect of others, we should also expect of ourselves. During her tenure as Garda Commissioner, Noreen O'Sullivan was frequently before Oireachtas committees. She was subject to questions that sometimes crossed the line that divides robust inquiry from personalised attack. In the end, Cathaoirleach, these allegations, which have been found by the tribunal to be unsupported by evidence, became more than anybody could reasonably bear, particularly in an extremely pressurised, responsible and visible job such as that of Garda Commissioner. The tribunal did not find any evidence that former Commissioner Noreen O'Sullivan was party to the calumny visited upon Sergeant Maurice McCabe, or indeed any wrongdoing on her part in relation to Superintendent David Taylor. I think it's important that in all the circumstances that these findings are recorded in the House. As I did on the occasion of her retirement, I want to thank Commissioner Noreen O'Sullivan for her service. I want to acknowledge wrongs perpetrated against her in this and other houses, and I want to wish herself and her family well for future endeavours. While some members of An Garda Síochána are revealed by the tribunal to have behaved in a reprehensible manner, Mr Justice Charlton also highlights the diligent and professional approach taken by many members of the organisation. As Minister for Justice, this gives me grounds for optimism for the future. The misdeeds of the few should not taint the majority. Mr Justice Charlton raises the fact that the Oireachtas did not debate his second interim report dealing with terms of reference N and O regarding complaints made by Garda Keith Harrison. I am sure that senators will acknowledge that there can be a level of furore in relation to a matter giving rise to a tribunal that is seldom matched by an in-depth analysis on publication of the report, particularly if it makes for uncomfortable reading by members of the Houses of the Oireachtas. I don't think we should shy away from some degree of self-reflection as a Parliament if we are to ensure the maintenance and the preservation of a healthy democracy. Garda Keith Harrison and his partner Marissa Sims allege that the Garda Síochána at the highest level have prevailed upon the HSE to intervene in their family affairs as a consequence of the making of protected disclosures by Garda Harrison. The media coverage of these allegations, which when put together with Sergeant Maurice McCabe's experiences with Tusla, opened the appalling vista of the Garda Síochána colluding with the social services to target the members who raised these very issues. Mr Justice Charlton fully investigated Garda Harrison's allegations. He finds, and I quote, "All of the allegations of Garda Keith Harrison and Marissa Sims examined by the tribunal are entirely without validity," unquote. Mr Justice Charlton goes on to say, and I quote again, "It is appropriate here to exonerate everyone in the social services and policing accused by them of discreditable conduct," unquote. His words require no further elucidation on my part. Let me turn, if I can, Cathaoirleach, to the future. I very much welcome the Garda Commissioner's initial response to the report last week. I met with Commissioner Harris earlier today. I assured him of my support as he addresses the findings in this report. It's clear that there are consequences to be dealt with for individuals, and much of that will fall to the Garda Commissioner. Not be helpful for me to comment directly on these matters at this particular juncture. I can say, however, that any action required of myself or my department will be followed up speedily and thoroughly. Mr Justice Charlton also refers to protected disclosures and how they were used in the lead-up to the establishment of the tribunal. I note that he questions in particular if there is a lacuna in the system whereby protected disclosures properly made in accordance with the 14 Act are then made available to members of the Oireachtas and to the media, where those, the subject of the allegations, have little or no opportunity to respond. This has created a situation where those accused are practically considered guilty until proven innocent. It's an abuse of an act introduced to protect genuine whistleblowers from reporting what they reasonably believed to be genuine wrongs. I believe that the issue raised by the Tribunal merits consideration. I raised this with my colleague, the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, whose department has carriage of this legislation. Mr Justice Peter Charlton is right when he says that new structures will not of themselves create the culture that would avoid the repetition of bad practice that has been highlighted now in a number of reports on the Garda Síochána. It requires significant cultural change, embedding consistent good practices and conscientious supervision by those in management ranks. On Garda Síochána commissioned an independent organisation culture audit earlier this year, which spoke to many rank and file Gardaí, and the report also highlights many of the issues addressed by the report of the Tribunal. It's imperative that measures are taken by the Garda Commissioner to address the findings of the audit. Furthermore, as the House will be aware, the Commission on the Future of Policing in Ireland reported in September. The Commission has produced a comprehensive roadmap for the transformation of Garda Síochána. No more than the Disclosures Tribunal report, I'd strongly recommend that anyone with an interest in policing read the Commission report from cover to cover. I'm currently engaged in a consultation process with the departments and agencies impacted by the report, and I'll be returning to Government with a high-level implementation plan before the end of the year. The report specifically recommends a new oversight architecture for policing that defines and separates responsibility for governance, oversight and accountability. It also addresses the critical issues of discipline in Garda Síochána. Similar to Mr Justice Charlton, recommends a new disciplinary regime. GSOC would be replaced by a new complaints body that would handle all complaints against Garda Síochána that raise serious issues about standards of policing, police integrity itself, such as potential breaches of the law, violation of human rights, corruption, issues that might indicate a widespread or systemic problem within the police. These measures and others in the report have the potential to break the cycle of controversy that has beset Garda Síochána for far too long. The implementation plan for the Commission's report will take full account of the issues and recommendations raised in the Tribunal report. So to return briefly to where I began, Sergeant Maurice McCabe has done the state a huge service. Mr Justice Peter Charlton has done likewise. But their service will be for nothing if we do not respond appropriately. I was greatly taken with the set of obligations on Gardaí set out towards the end of the report, to take pride in their work and their uniform, to always be honest, to be visible, to be polite, to serve the people of Ireland, to treat the obligation to the public as superior to any false sense that Gardaí should stick up for each other. And finally, the obligation of self-analysis. These are simple values: doing the right thing, being honest and decent, but they're fundamental. These are the standards that we should all observe as public servants, members of the House, indeed as human beings, and they are certainly what the public has a right to expect of Garda Síochána at each and every level. My own Department of Justice is engaged in a reflective process in undertaking the fundamental transformation of its structures and processes arising from the first report of the Effectiveness and Renewal Group. The second interim report was published yesterday. Comments favourably on good progress having been made across the Department. That self-reflection will continue. It will deepen to take on board the Tribunal report. Clearly, there are lessons for Garda Síochána, for my department, indeed for all public bodies, for the government, for the Oireachtas, and not least for the media. Central tenet for all of us is that we must learn how to deal more effectively in facing up to and determining the truth of allegations, while not making the mistake of treating allegations as given facts in all circumstances. Above all, we must as a society respond appropriately to those who speak up to highlight our wrong. For my part, I am determined that these lessons must be and will be learned and applied. Thank you, Cathaoirleach.
Flanagan. Now, by order of the House, contributions of group spokespersons is for 8 minutes, but time can be shared, and we are very tight on time, so I'd ask you to bear that in mind, please.
In the base that there may not be all groups present, that those of us who are here could be able to speak, because there are groups that are not present in the chamber for whatever reason.
Yeah, but there's only one group.
I'd be happy to amend the order of business to include that.
There's only one group, but Leader, are you proposing to extend the time?
He is, yeah. Just to, if members want to speak, yeah, because in fairness, most people are not here.
So time sharing is permitted if you want. So, are you proposing to extend the time?
Just to
drama queens who are here.
Sorry, Senator Conway.
Just to allow for Senator.
The time sharing is permitted, and I will give latitude, whatever. Is that
okay? Come on.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Daly. Thank you, Senator Daly.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and thanks, Minister, for coming into the House and outlining the issues in the Charlton report. And I won't go into the detail as you have outlined it again, but what seems to be lost in all of what we have discussed and what has happened to Sergeant McCabe and what has befallen his family and other whistleblowers. You quote slightly Othello in terms of he has done the state some service, and another quote may be that if a man stands for a righteous cause, he is stronger than all the hosts of error. And Sergeant McCabe has stood against all those hosts of error, but what we have forgotten is what was he doing when he was whistleblowing. He was taking on a system which was rigging the penalty points. He was highlighting the fact that assaults were not being properly investigated. And as a consequence, people were on the road that shouldn't have been on the road because they were not getting the penalty points that they deserved. And as your own department is well aware, there were over 60 people last year who were involved in serious accidents and accidents causing death who should not have been on the road. So let's step back from what happened to Sergeant McCabe and say, well, what actually happened to those Gardaí who were fraudulently manipulating the penalty point system, which meant that people died on our roads? What happened to those people whose crimes were not properly investigated and those people went on to assault again? Why did the Gardaí allow that to happen? But what happened to the Gardaí who didn't investigate those crimes properly and who didn't ensure that our roads were safe by people being taken off? That's the fun. So we step it all back and say, yes, we know what befell Sergeant McCabe. And like just to highlight it in itself, he said, they have destroyed me, my career and my family. That was a letter that Sergeant McCabe gave so that it would be read out in the Dáil. The Charlton report talked about the astounding inefficiency of TUSLA, inertia, and that the allegations against Sergeant McCabe took a life of its own, and that Sergeant McCabe, that he was they found him to be a good citizen and a good officer. But the question really goes back to consequences. Yes, we know what happened at a high level in terms of the Garda Commissioner and Ministers for Justice who resigned because of the handling of it. But it really is, this will continue to happen because at a fundamental level, there are no consequences for people who carry out the things that Sergeant McCabe highlighted and for which he was isolated within An Garda Síochána. And it goes back to this. I know and I welcome the initiatives that you are taking in relation to reform. But we give an example of the blood transfusion scandal. And the Law Reform Commission proposed 13 years ago that there would be a corporate manslaughter bill brought in this state. And myself and Deputy O'Callaghan and others have brought forward the bill for the corporate manslaughter bill. Now, bear this in mind. We have put forward exactly the Law Reform Commission bill. That would mean that when somebody is inside in the Department of Health or working for a transfusion service and knowingly allows contaminated blood products to be issued to women and kills them, that they would go to jail. We would all think that would be something that would be appropriate. And yet that bill is not passed. After hundreds of women died needlessly. This was not human error. This was somebody whose job it was to make sure these blood products were safe, knew they weren't safe, sent them out anyway. Did he go to jail? No. Did he die? No. Did the people he affected die? They most certainly did. And where is the law to stop it happening again? It is sitting in the department. And they actually do not want Section 3 of that bill, which would mean that people would be held account if somebody dies. Now, I'm not too sure, and you're far more qualified in the law than I would be, but if that corporate manslaughter bill was in place and a guard had been responsible for ensuring that somebody who should have been off the road was actually still on the road, that they hadn't allowed the penalty points to appear on their record, that that person's licence should have been taken off them, and they went off and killed someone subsequently by being on the road, should that guard have gone to jail for corporate manslaughter because they didn't do their job? Now, there's a high threshold on that bill. I'm not too sure it would. But I know that if of today, and we're talking about scandals, the reason we keep talking about scandals, there are no consequences for the people who don't do their jobs. Sergeant McCabe was trying to do his job as he saw it, and he was correct in what he was doing, and the system tried to prevent him. The people who should have gone to jail, the people who should have lost their jobs, are still members of Garda Síochána. They're the ones that isolated him in his Garda division. They're the ones that felt it was okay to allow penalty points to be allowed to disappear out of the system. And they're the ones that didn't investigate serious assaults. And if those assaults caused death, the reason those people died is because the people who should have investigated didn't do their job. So we are talking continually about systems failure. The reason the systems failure is we expect people to do their job. But if people don't do their jobs, they should be held accountable. And we haven't learned the lesson from something as serious, as callous as the blood transfusion service, where the Law Reform Commission proposed the idea of a corporate manslaughter legislation. And if that happened again today, if the exact same thing happened, women contaminated with blood transfusion products and other issues in your own area, Minister, where they knew the system was not working for people in Portlaoise Hospital in relation to the maternity services, you ask them, well, if they knew it wasn't working and they didn't highlight it or they didn't intervene and yet they allowed it to keep going on and on, there should be consequences. Tragedies happen and we understand that. But the problem with our system is accountability. When somebody does something wrong, to walk out with your pension and a resignation, a bit of disgrace, obviously, but the consequences for the citizen is that it'll keep happening because there are no consequences for the people who don't do their jobs as they should. Thank you, Cathaoirleach.
Senator Daly. Senator Crockwell.
Minister, I want to thank you for coming to the House this evening. Clearly, you're deeply committed and supportive of the report. I also want to acknowledge the fact that members of the Gardaí every day put their lives on the line in this country, and they do a job and do an excellent job for this country. Cathaoirleach, Minister, it is a rarity in this country that a tribunal not only completes a substantial part of its work in 10 months, but that the public have been left with a clear, unambiguous answer to the questions which led to the tribunal in the first place. Most of all, however, the fact that Maurice McCabe himself has been unequivocally vindicated in his relentless pursuit of high standards within the police force and, in the words of Justice Charlton, exemplified hard work in his own calling provides a rare glimmer of hope that the tribunal system can, from time to time, deliver justice. This is now the third report where Maurice McCabe has been vindicated for the substance of the issue he was raising within the force, with the necessity for a tribunal only required because, again, in the words of Justice Charlton, he was repulsively denigrated for being more than a good citizen and police officer. It was established because of his pursuit of truth and justice. Sergeant Maurice McCabe was subjected to a slanderous campaign of calumny, in the words of Charlton, by Commissioner Martin Callan, and that in it he was actively aided by his press officer, Superintendent David Taylor. What Maurice McCabe endured is possibly one of the most despicable stains of An Garda Síochána from the highest-ranked person within the force, and no amount of compensation will lightly return the lost years and toll that has been imposed on his family. The loss of ministerial office cannot, in any sense, be viewed in the same breath as what Maurice McCabe has suffered. But equally, Francis Fitzgerald's resignation and Noreen O'Sullivan were brought about, and how they were brought about cannot be ignored. Almost all in the opposition benches, and here I include myself, said that Minister Fitzgerald had to resign because it was believed, firstly, that the information she gave the Dáil about her state of knowledge of the legal strategy to undermine Maurice McCabe was untruthful, and secondly, she sat idly by while a good man's reputation was being systematically destroyed and undermined in the most vicious manner at the O'Higgins Commission. The third reason, however, and it can't be swept under the rug, is the crazed environment of Leinster House, which you referred to yourself, Minister, where politics sometimes becomes a blood sport. A head was wanted, and those calling for that head were willing to collapse a government and force an election unless they got one. Sadly, some took satisfaction and even pleasure out of Minister Fitzgerald's resignation. In their minds, victory was complete, even if the quest for the full truth was the casualty. Cathaoirleach, Minister, this type of behaviour and politics reflects the same boorish manner in which Commissioner Callanan and Taylor operated their public affairs. Is it any wonder that there is so much contempt for politicians in this country when, even faced with the most serious maladministration within An Garda Síochána, we still found a way to turn it into a game for a political assassination? The Tribunal has made it absolutely clear that the actions taken by Frances Fitzgerald in effectively not intervening in the Commission's work when she became aware of the legal strategy were fully justified. As Justice Charlton says, any hint of working things out between Garda Commissioner and the Department of Justice has had, as a matter of ethics, to be avoided. Ethics should be the driving force in Irish politics, and that's the key question we need to address here with respect to Frances Fitzgerald. The Tribunal not only found that there were no questions here for Fitzgerald to answer, the Tribunal found that the Minister's intervention would have been unethical. He also explicitly found that the only appropriate action for one investigated party was not to interfere with the approach of the other investigated party. In other words, the Minister acted at all times appropriately. There is no going around this fact that Minister Fitzgerald was taken out mirrored public controversy and yet found to have done nothing wrong in her function as Minister. I do think it's petty in the extreme for any of us involved not to acknowledge the simple fact that the very essence of why we forced her out, her inaction, has proved to be an ethical approach that a Supreme Court Justice and Tribunal Chairman said ought to have been adopted. Minister Fitzgerald rose through the ranks from a member of this House to Minister for Children, Minister for Business and Enterprise, Minister for Justice and Tánaiste of this country. For her career to have been sullied in the way it was mirrors the brutish and bullish culture of Commissioner Callanan and David Taylor, adopted in their campaign against Maurice McCabe. Cathaoirleach, Minister, I want to say to Frances Fitzgerald that I let my own standards fall when I became part of the frenzy that called for her head. I want to say I am sorry for any hurt I caused her. I am sorry for the hurt to her reputation and to her family. She comes out of this tribunal with her reputation intact. Cathaoirleach, how can we as politicians possibly give leadership and inspire a decent public servants when our political behaviour is sometimes so far removed from facts and reality, but instead feeds the notion that politics is some cynical and gladiatorial battle filled with winners and losers? Having acknowledged that there were political games at play in this sorry affair, I must accept that a number of my colleagues in both houses of the Oireachtas who have persisted on many matters surrounding wrongdoings in An Garda Síochána must not be lumped in the same place as the game players. We owe a debt of thanks to those who take wrongdoing in all parts of our society and bring it to this House to ensure the innocent do not suffer. Here I am speaking of those who championed the McCabe case. I cannot begin to understand the pain